Hello, Nadia. How are you?
All right, thank you.
I'm not sure if I'm doing that right. Oh yeah. So I read your thing. We had a brief chat before, didn't we?
Yeah.
And I read your thing, which was really good. The Dear Community, what about painting as annotation? Oh, it's really good. And it really reminded me of, it made me laugh because it reminded me of, you know, that Guerrilla Girls poster that says the advantage of being a woman artist. Do you remember that? Do you know
Yeah,
that one?
I know it well.
Yeah. Very funny, isn't it? Working without the pressure of success. I just remember it for my PhD, and I was trying to look at Anna Atkins, and they were going, but maybe there were some great advantages for the Victorian artist Anna Atkins in that nobody could see her, so she could do what she likes. But I like the way you're talking about the margins. It kind of made me think about that, but something much more kind of subtle. Yeah, I was going to ask you about that, but maybe that's just that really annoying question.
No, it's really good to talk about it. Just because I was thinking about like what is her art story, and then reading a paragraph that introduces it that says, I didn't laugh, but I felt slightly uncomfortable where it said successful women creatives or something.
Hard to read that.
I just thought that, you know, what is successful?
Right. Well, whatever it is, I definitely am not it.
Well, that kind of, it's a question. It's a kind of difficult question, isn't it? But also,
Yeah.
like visibility, and then whether you even think you're successful, or what does successful mean? You know. Anyway, that's another question. But it'd be nice.
I think that's really interesting, actually. And I was talking. Actually, I should have asked you this first, and maybe we would edit this out depending on how you feel about this. I don't know how you feel about talking about fertility things, but for me, anyway, talking about myself, what I found a lot was when I went to the doctor and said I was like in my 40s and couldn't have children, they all went, "Oh, successful career then," and I just went,
Haven't got that.
"No, mate, it's nothing to do with it."
Over 100 grand in the bank a year.
Yeah, I was working in the city and I just didn't have time for it. I just think it's a really funny idea. The idea of it's so embedded, isn't it? All of that stuff with women and success is the choices you make, and maybe that's, I don't know, maybe that's a whole separate conversation. But
yeah, I think it's really. I mean, it like ties into loads of different things, doesn't it? In terms of this idea of what you think is successful, and like, is successful just managing to keep doing something? I mean, even without an audience.
Yeah,
or any kind of audience, or just having 3 mates that look at your work or something, or but yeah, to go back to your Anna Atkins
yeah,
kind of question, or
oh yeah, the margins. I like that idea. You were talking about art as annotation. I thought that sounded really interesting, and it made me think of marginalia and the kind of things you. There was this Nabokov book published recently of, I think it's of the, what do you call it, the manuscript of Lolita, and it had all like his coffee stains on his things he'd written and stuff, and it kind of showed that he was aware how sort of dodgy, not, you know, how weird the thing he was talking about was in the way that the book didn't. I don't know what I'm trying to say. Oh yeah, when I went to find my father's stuff and I got all of his like recycling, and then there was a crossword and it had all of his daughter's initials on. I just thought, God, that's really weird. The things you can find out a lot more sometimes about someone, can't you, than by the big statements they make.
yeah, sure,
Little hidden things, and that maybe marginalia is much more about what you're really thinking than, say, Jackson Pollock's massive kind of.
yeah, and also, isn't it? It depends. That I think that takes me to like, what is the thing that makes you do what you do? Like you as an artist, or me as an artist, or whatever, however you want to term yourself. Like,
Definitely.
and I was sort of thinking that something that we maybe have in common is that we're like interested in this sort of impulses of people to do things. Like, so it might be subconscious, unconscious, conscious, all these different layers, and that those impulses, that the person that you might be studying might not understand their own impulses, but they're readable later on, and then they're really readable in the aesthetic that they realize, you know, somehow they're really readable in if they're artists, it's really readable in the work that they make. It's somehow clearer than, so that I think that's why, like, marginalia and then the trying to think of, because I think I used the description of annotation because I was like casting around for a way. I'm always casting around for a way to describe what I do. And annotation just seems more appropriate, just because of the nature of the work, which is looking at predominantly looking at other women artists and offering some kind of personal commentary on that work through working in their idiom or something. So, and that there's something about absolutely that idea of authority, like stepping back from, or not ever thinking that one's own voice is an authoritative voice or even maybe a valuable voice, and that in, you know, annotation is just a more of a provisional way of having a voice in the world, but not like suggesting in any way that it should be dominant or overbearing, or that it takes the grand narrative or something. So so to go back to thinking about your PhD, and it's Anna Atkins, isn't it? Like that idea of it's freed by that like lack of visibility. I mean, it's really difficult to think about her in those terms because that's not kind of applicable in her, like she's a whole other set of impulses, isn't she? So I mean, I don't know that enough about her, you know lots about her, but yeah, so again, it's the conditions, isn't it, that how something is made. But there's obviously, there is some relief in the idea of someone not looking at what you're doing as much as there is like power in the idea that no one's looking at what you're doing. So.
Ever. Yeah, that is really interesting. I think when I found, just, is it all right to talk about the PhD briefly?
Yeah, no, do. Say a bit about what you've been doing and like, and what the PhD is. And
so long, and it feels like a long kind of painful time ago. And we've spoken before, haven't we, about how we feel it can crush creativity.
Yeah, like that about PhD.
Yeah, it never want to make, exactly, and the idea of art being fun and things. For me, I felt it was weird. The research had to be, I tried to show that it was really about the researcher or like the collector, like say Pitt Rivers Museum was so much about Reverend Pitt Rivers, or just, you know, that so many of these museums and things that we've got are so much one man's vision of himself,
absolutely,
reflected in objects. And that's the same with so much sort of research, all these anthropologists that have studied these people, and they've gone to it from their really weird kind of, you know, their public school ideas about things, maybe in some instances. But I found this form of analysis that I really liked, and it's one that's used in sociology, and it's about it's called interpretative phenomenological analysis, and it's sort of the idea that your feelings always relate to what you analyze. So you photocopy like the thing you're analyzing. So say it was your thing, and then I'd photocopy it with loads of white paper, and then I just put all of my annotations on it. It just made me think of this, the annotations, and it's sort of both. It's the work and your annotations, and maybe what's in between. And I kind of wondered if that was a kind of a parallel or something to do with how your work is, maybe a little bit.
Yeah, no, I think it's like, like I think that's, well, I just think that there isn't any objective, there's no objective research, is there? Or there's no, you know, what these, like everything is framed through your own subjective lens. So the thing you're drawn to, and then the way that you interpret it or understand it, all it is like shades of you. So to claim, like, you know, it's awful, you can't go on holiday from yourself, and you can, you know, and I might think that I'm like working in the idiom of like this painter Christina Ramberg that I'm interested in, or previously Winifred Knights, or you know, I'm the things that I pick out are just the things that are informed by my own concerns, interest, history, memory, dislikes, paranoias, like it's like, so yes, it's, so I don't know, so you're talking about, what did you call it, so a form of analysis that's called
it's sort of called IPA. It's quite easy to remember. It was, and then
who was thinking about that, and who was like describing that, and what kind of context were they using it in?
Well, I think it was, sociological originally, maybe in the 60s, I think. And then you get a group of lots of different, well, not lots, probably about 10 or 12. I'm sort of probably talking absolute rubbish. Let's hope that no sociologists hears or sees this. And then they all comment. And then at the end, there's a sort of a kind of summation, but really they keep the kind of document there with all the annotations kind of visible, so that
isn't that also what happens in a sort of Talmudic college as well?
Yeah, I think it is. And also it reminded me a bit of that Sophie Kell. I mean, I know we both have slightly unsure feelings about Sophie Kell. And that thing she did about when she got dumped, and then she got all those different people to respond to the text she got, so like lawyers and artists and things. But then weirdly, I don't think she got anyone working class, or I mean, she just got these
particular social circle.
Particular, but yeah, I don't know really what I'm saying, but yeah, the non-hierarchical nature of it is really interesting. I thought of what you were saying.
Yeah, and this idea of like polyphony, like the idea of like increasingly in like, because I found in painting the idea that you make an authoritative like body of work that's really succinct, like totally alienating, and I've never been able to do it, and I really sort of struggle with it. And then like I don't make exhibitions that frequently, but like what I have been trying to do in the ones that I have made in the last few years is that, like, how do you have multiple voices? How do you have a polyphony of voices in like space? Like, how do you contradict yourself? How do you, like, how can you get painting to do that when painting is meant to be like, so, well, who says it's meant to be anything, but you know, is that it's a kind of very coherent and kind of,
there's an authority about it.
Yeah, and it's like, I don't know, I don't respond to that in a lot of painting, but I love painting. I love looking at painting. I love what it can give you, but there's a really fine line between a sort of cohesive body of work that bores you to tears, or doesn't somehow.
A Magnus Opus.
Yeah. And I mean, that's, I feel uncertain about kind of calling that something to do with gender. I mean, that's just because historically there's been, many more male artists foregrounded than female artists, but I think it's just it's some of the rules of painting, maybe, I don't know. Or market, like it's a rule of the market as well, isn't it? The market loves to be able to understand things in a simplistic way, and then practice and the market go hand in hand and self-perpetuate or whatever. I don't know. I mean, I don't find the discussions about market that interesting.
No, but I think you're right. That's really interesting. And the idea, the sort of myth of the artist, or did we talk about that briefly, like artist studios and the myth of the artist in the artist studio, and that show, that touring show, and like how they did that with Francis Bacon's studio, and even took all his dust and stuff from London, from the Muse to Dublin. But I find it interesting what you're talking about as well in Sub-Saharan. And I keep saying that, and it's only just one very brief thing you've written. That you're sort of going back to the things that are on your wall, maybe, that you're looking at. Say if you were in a studio, do you think that's anything to do with what you do? I don't know. Looking at like visually, or maybe things you've read, like you're saying it would have been called source material, but now you call research, maybe.
Yeah, I mean that. I don't know. Everybody makes work in different ways, don't they? But I think I'm, as many people are, just trying to get to the bottom of that source material and like understand what visual currency is and why it sort of sexy, and or why I'm drawn to it and what it is. But sorry, to go back to the kind of question about Francis Bacon, what were you saying about Bacon's,
I don't know really.
like the kind of
the marketability of it, that sort of the genius, and it does seem to often have quite a male thing. I heard this guy talking from, I think maybe Sotheby's, and that was kind of very interesting. I thought it was talking about a lot to do with that sort of genius as commodity, maybe. I mean, you didn't call it that, but
sure.
maybe, yeah. And also things like the provenance of things. So if somebody, like, I think someone called Robert Scull was this big collector, and if someone like that has a collection, then it automatically makes it a much more desirable collection. And also things like if there's any kind of event, like they faked when Andy Warhol was shot, they faked a very few things were grazed by the bullets, and then someone then knackered some actual Warhols by doing that. So they kind of tried to put the value up, but then they put it down loads because it wasn't real, or I don't know. It's just the weird ideas of value, and the whole thing is hierarchy, isn't it? And based on someone's got something that you haven't got, so they're different and special. And I don't know what I'm saying. I think I'm just rambling now, Nadia.
No, it's good. I mean, I just like looping back again to your talking about kind of collections and collections of things, and on the one hand you've got like artworks being in collections to raise their values, and then somewhere else you've got artists collecting things, or artist collections, or sort of thinking about your work, and like it's really you're a writer, you're an illustrator, you make objects, you make paintings, but something that I kind of trace all the way through it is this sort of a fascination with objects and their like emotional currency, and again like psychological potential, or and how important like artists' objects can be, collections of objects. Like I'm doing this residency at Dulwich House, which is Dora Gordon. Obviously I haven't been there. I've been there once because of being unable to travel because of COVID, but we've had a kind of running a reading group around it, and one of the texts we read was the Sheila Heti text about the artist, and I don't know how to say her surname, but Sarah, and her name is CWYAR. I don't know how you pronounce that.
No, I wouldn't have a clue.
She made a series of a film called Rose Gold iPhone, and it's about rose gold, like the desirability of the rose gold.
Oh, yeah, that's like high up there, isn't it?
Yeah, but Sheila Heti wrote this very nice text, I think basically responding to that film. That's the idea of kind of like artists, artists, academics, people's collections of objects and what they contained and what they say about people. And there's a really beautiful section in it about an academic who loses another academic friend, woman, and she goes into her office and photographs all the things placed on her desk and the certain way that they're placed, and the fact that there's very maybe like things picked up on a walk, or things with like huge significance and personal meaning and value that she can't decipher, but for her they're representative of this person. And I was just thinking, sorry, this is a really sort of saying that I was thinking about just really thinking about like this idea of like the wonder of the object in your work, and even in your illustration, when I see the things that you're picking out, these like that are full of this meaning, content, and wonder. Like so often they might have amazing stories to them, or they're things you love, or
I hadn't really thought of it in terms of the illustration, but yeah, I suppose you're right. When I get to do my stuff rather than a commission, I do try and focus on things like that, like Peggy Guggenheim's sunglasses. I'd love to read that text. That sounds really interesting. And
Yeah.
it sounds a bit like it's sort of that person's sort of nest, kind of like their.
Yeah. And because Dora Gordine had with her husband,
Mm.
Richard Hare, they collect, like, she had a sort of fake identity in a way, or an identity that was confabulated from loads of truths and untruths in her life. And but they kind of bonded. He was like a Russian expert, and they bonded over collecting Russian artifacts from like pre-revolutionary period. But she's not actually even Russian, but she kind of pretends she's like a white Russian. So it's like this sort of fake identity cemented, and then a relationship that's like propped up by this sort of self fantasy. So sorry, I don't know where I'm kind of going with that, but again, I just
It's really interesting. Yeah, that is really interesting. And what he collects is, yeah, it's really interesting, and it does remind me also of sort of what people tell you about themselves. Like, even if you meet them briefly, I don't know, like in Marks and Spencer's or something, you wouldn't do that in Stockholm, but and it's sort of the story they want to tell you about themselves. I suppose the objects are a part of that, aren't they, often?
yeah, I think it's like a formulation of identity, isn't it? And then I don't know, and then that made me think about this like question of her art story, like the idea that you like confabulate a story about your work, your career, and where you are and how you kind of got to where you are. And I feel like I have known you since the 90s. It's been sort of really amazing to watch. Like, I've always been amazed by the joy that you see me get from painting. Like, I remember asking you in the 90s, I was like, don't you find painting really, like, don't you feel really sick when you're painting? And I remember you saying, no, I feel really good when I'm painting. Like, it makes me happy. Like,
but then Nadia, for years I haven't really painted. I went to live in this house and the guy had died about 15 years previously. Not sure if you came to that one. Yeah, you did. I think you did. And just nearly every room in the house was full of his stuff. So it's just like the place where you could live was about 2% of the house. And it completely put me off making anything physical. And I think also, I mean, hopefully you don't get this, because I think your work really, rightly it sells. But so many times you go, oh great, you're gonna make, or not you, I go, great, I'm gonna make this work, and then I'm gonna go, oh yeah, no, and then like with my MA show where I did this painting day, like 365 paintings, and I've only just like been flogging them on Instagram, and I think there's something really depressing for me about just having loads of my own paintings around me. I really love the act of painting's really nice, and my mind goes blank. But it's the sort of afterwards that I don't like so much. I don't know, if I had a kind of outlet, I think I must just be really frustrated and not have any kind of outlet pent up painting.
but I mean, that's interesting, isn't it? There's like two things there, because like there's one thing of like the frustration of like making stuff that then doesn't enter the world, but then also there is like the joy, the actual true joy of painting, which I think when
which I get, oh well, that's really interesting. But then you're brilliant, and I mean, you won't feel this because you're really modest, but you're so much more successful than me. You have your work out in public, in so many more arenas. So maybe you don't feel that bit of frustration.
I barely finish anything. I don't like. I make about 3 paintings a year, but I mean that's something else. But I think that like that's so strange to think about that. Again, it's like it's a bit like some weird career dysmorphia that you've got. Because you think
you've definitely got,
I just look at you and And I'm just so amazed by like the way that you always find a way to like do these things that you really want to do and you love, and you get them out there and they do circulate, like your illustration. And then how that's how people have
Well,
really
that's nice.
loved it, and
Oh,
really want to work with you, and like you're doing amazing things working with really interesting people and great
that's
projects.
really nice. And I do find that much easier. And I think that's partly a response to trying not to be bitter about not, not getting into things or not having a gallery, all those kind of things. I think I felt like it was more within my control. Of course, I don't know, I think I have these bad things about like feeling really bitter, probably quite bitter about people that are kind of aristocratic, and then they have all these brilliant connections, and this is probably just a terrible paranoia, and it's probably much more about me and my brain, because I always feel that I had a really bad, crap education in a comprehensive in Liverpool and then in Suffolk, and then I just feel like why couldn't I be born really like rich, and I just love knowledge? Why can't I have been born like this privileged, and then I'd have gone to these public schools and then it wouldn't have been embarrassing to learn and I could have just like absorbed it all, and now I'd just be living in like Kensington obviously, and fantasy anyway.
Really, I mean, it's so important to like talk
Living
about that, because like this transparency, like the reality of like people's circumstances, artists, is
yeah.
never fucking talked about. And then I think, Chris Kraus is like loved,
Mm.
and I love her. But what I really love her for is being like completely transparent about her, like financially,
Mm.
how she has to exist. And that's been a backbone of quite a lot of her writing, that she's like, this like she's so brilliant at kind of nailing iniquity and like problems, and then like horrendous life in the art, being around and in the art world in the 70s or 80s, 90s. But then I love her for just like being completely upfront. Like I've bought these houses. The houses are the things that allow me to write because I get an income from these houses. Like no one is honest about that shit. Like,
Yeah.
and if I think about I don't know, to go back to this idea of like what defines success. Like I think just doing it, like just still managing to do it, never mind audience, like for me is success. But I guess most people would not read that as success. Success would have some other, like, success would be perhaps being represented by a gallery. Success would be having X amount of public shows a year, maybe having a few galleries in different European cities, being invited to, and I don't know what people's like notions of success are. I think we don't ask ourselves that enough. But if I think about people I studied with, all those people that fit that identity of an artist are people that have private income or trust fund. Like, who knew? I didn't know that that's what you needed to really have that kind of space and time to just have such a kind of solid, the singular activity of making practice in like, I don't know. So I think about that, and I think about my partner also not coming from any kind of background that mirrors that in any way, and like what do you have to not sacrifice, but like what do you have to do in order to just be functioning as an artist if you don't have that kind of privilege, and I've been really lucky because like education has offered me.
I was going to say, do you think for you teaching is a way around it for you?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like, it's not just that it pays the bill, it's like that for since I left college in 2000, it's the only place I've been able to find any critical, like receptive community, and it's like through that my thinking's grown, and I've been challenged, and
that's good.
I've
So you
had a voice,
your work.
Yeah, my work, absolutely. Like, and then it just, I'm like, thank fuck that education has existed, allowed me to enter that, because I wouldn't have had any other way of like showing work, or like I just wouldn't have had any critical dialogue apart from like the very small group of people I know, which is, you know, that is wonderful. But yeah, it's just that idea of like visibility and silence, isn't it? And and so many, if you think about all the people that you were at college with, or the people you might have taught, or the people that actually continue to do it, like, are so slim, you know, it's such a slim amount over the long term. And also maybe it's like, maybe we need to alter our notions of career. Maybe like it's fine to just have to just make work for 2 years or something. I don't know. Why do we have to have a 75-year career? I don't know. But
that's true. Yeah, I think I think all of what you're saying, that's really interesting, because I remember a feeling. I don't know if you've experienced tutors who you felt are quite resentful that they're having to be there, that they're kind of really, they're just saying, yeah, well, I'm just going to go to my studio now. Or you know that they're really feeling a bit pissed off, that they're, I don't know, that they're not like at Max Wigram's house or something, that they just, they're feeling like you are this inferior. But then when Roxy Walsh came to talk and tutor us at Newcastle, so where you used to teach, she was just totally different and kind of treated people like, like an artist, and that was quite a revelation. But yeah, so that's really interesting that you say that it helps your work and it provides you with that sort of critical tension, because I think some people almost feel like they give their best ideas to their students and then that's like flushing it down the toilet kind of thing, and they feel really bit bitter about that. So that's good, bitterness key. But also what you were saying before was interesting about Chris Kraus. I think it's sometimes quite hard to be creative when you feel like you're struggling for survival, and that
isn't it? Christ alive. I mean, it's totally impossible.
You don't have this sort of energy, you're just going money, or that maybe sometimes people with money don't realize that.
Just think the energy that you expend on it. I was thinking about the conversation this morning, and I just was sort of thinking about like the kind of crazy impoverished like sacrifices, which is a privilege to be able to make those sacrifices for a start. I totally understand that. But I just remember like being so skin, and like you lending me 100 quid, like, and like you were like, I think I came to your studio and I was like, I just like wrecked and driving back to Cardiff or something, and I was just thinking, I haven't got any, I've just got no money, I've just got nothing, I've got no money, and I was sort of crying, and you went, oh, I've got 100 quid I can lend you.
I remember that. Where the hell did I get it from?
I just sort of think about like some of the circumstances in which you lived in, like some of the,
yeah, that's right, that is exactly that.
Like, I remember you living on like different boats, and then you just sort of saying that you'd walk along the river and like see a kind of floating pontoon with a tarpaulin over it, and you like, I live on that.
I'd say that to Jamie, there'd be like a puddle, and he'd go, yeah, go on, why don't you could live in that puddle, couldn't you? That would be nice. We could get a really nice like Tesco bag or something, and then that would be a really nice place to live.
I don't know, it's like, and then I think, when you were saying, maybe you don't want to, or maybe you do, or you don't want to talk about fertility, but this idea of like both of us, thanks to you, I've recently had some children, and you blazed the trail for that. But, I mean, I think, in our 20s and 30s, like if you've got no support network and you want to be an artist, and and as a woman, you're like, there's no way I can do that, and there's no way I can.
Why we were so adamant that we didn't want children was because just the thought was like we couldn't have looked after them, or we didn't have the physical means to care for them.
Or financial. Nothing to be able to. And then there's a consequence to kind of postponing your fertility to your late 30s, or in my case 40s.
Me too, I was in my 40s.
But I think it's like I guess Richie Sunak has said some really bad stuff for the last couple of days. I've just seen on, I don't know, I've just seen on Instagram.
What bad stuff have you said recently?
I think it's something to do with basically what I can tell from Instagram is he's obviously saying to people in the creative fields, like, retrain. Really sort of helpful in light of COVID, and
Nice one.
And a few friends have kind of posted stuff where they're just like, well, I work for nothing anyway. Like,
yeah, exactly.
See what your world will look like without all my working for nothing. That actually, creative life isn't tenable, and that most, pretty much everybody just finds a million different ways,
other ways,
untenable thing up, and that that all this.
I know this is a sort of semi-pathetic thing to say, but like, the tie he'll have been wearing when he said that was probably designed by, will have been designed by someone. Every moment of his life, it's just he doesn't notice it because he has no visual education and he just doesn't even see that. I just found that really frustrating because you taught older. Hopefully you didn't experience it, but when I did that PGCE and taught in schools, just the disregard for anything visual was just so insulting, I felt, and so short-sighted. And it was always, within the curriculum, you always had to have your art lessons had to show literacy and numeracy, and it's just so crass. Of course you have to be I just, the disregard for kind of having any kind of visual education or understanding things. And even now when I say, people say, oh, you got PhD, what have you got it in? I say, oh, fine art. And they go, oh, that's all right, nice one, love. Like, that they think that's like, oh, have you got a BTEC in nail design? That's well done, sweetheart. It's just like, you just don't I don't know, it's just a weird disregard for it. Not that, I want to sort of say, like, I want to be French and have great value in philosophy, because all kinds of unpleasant things I'd have to deal with as well. But I don't know, just that thing. And unfortunately, weirdly, it was sort of brought in by Tony Blair a lot, I think.
I know, that's the really sad thing about it. It's like Labour.
It had to have a sort of business, viability. The whole thing was, where's the business going to be from this? And that was just seemed ridiculous. But
it's really depressing, I think. But then that's just the sort of it, not to let like New Labour off the hook, but it's kind of the state thinking, isn't it? When I once, I don't know what, where I used to teach at Newcastle University, I looked at the what's it called? I looked at the Equality and Diversity manifesto, because I just was really interested in what the kind of focus of it was, and it just, all it talked about was making any research activity that was successful able to make loads of money. So basically it just said, it wasn't talking about kind of a value of knowledge, and that we should all have equal access to learning, and that should be done on an even playing field, and that we should be, that the teaching should meet you in relation to your kind of interests and concerns and your prior educational needs. It was just basically, whatever you do here, if you can make it into a product, we just want to make sure everyone can get it to a market.
Just cash. It just said cash.
This is not what I thought Equality and Diversity Manifesto kind of what. So I was teaching
in an educational institution as well.
I know, exactly. So what it would value is that learning how to think, or being able to challenge knowledge. It was none of those things. It was just about access to market, equal access to market. So I don't know. Yeah, of course, education is really responsible for all these super fucked up ways of thinking about things. But I keep looking down because I've been making notes, so we've been going along.
Have you?
up
Yeah.
certain things that you've
What
like
time is it? Is it? Oh, look, we've got a quarter of an hour.
Oh.
Is that right? Left, I think. But I've got a funny watch on, so I'm not sure if that's right. Roughly. Is that right?
I wanted to like ask you, but I don't know whether.
Yeah.
Like, I think you've just overcome some extraordinarily difficult things.
Oh, thanks, Nadia. Oh, I'm happy to talk about anything. It's only my family that hates me talking about it.
I think that like, I don't know, that I mean, so serious, like the things that you've like had to deal with, and then how they have or haven't kind of shaped you. But like, I was wondering, like, about, I mean, you had a stroke, like, and how's that affected you, and how, like, have you dealt with this? Such a major thing to have a stroke at a young age. And
Yeah.
I know that it's like quite, I mean, it was, it wasn't just some simple, it was like really serious.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a few. Did you listen, by the way, to Samantha Morton on Desert Island Discs?
No, I didn't, but she is
Oh,
an
so
amazing
good.
woman.
Oh, she's amazing, isn't she?
She's amazing. But then I think of you when I think of her. So
Oh, thank you. That's nice. Yeah, she's amazing. Yeah, I think it had a weird impact in lots of ways. One thing that was quite weird, which then again I had when I experienced fertility things, was that how little the doctors really knew, and in the end they didn't really know. And they had a sort of specialist come and say he thought it might be trauma related. So that was kind of interesting. He described it as like, when you're on a computer and the circle just gets stuck and goes round and round and round. He said that's sort of neurologically, that's what was happening to me, that I was sort of stuck, and that he kind of described it as being like I've sort of taken antidepressants, and I had what do you call it, hypnotism to try and get rid of. I just can't cope with thinking about those things. I haven't really found counseling successful, so my very sort of anti-Freud method is just to kind of push everything down, completely ignore it, which is obviously not very successful, and probably manifests itself in lots of weird ways, like my extreme mess and having to sleep all the time and things like that. But he said, well, it's probably just you can't cope with trying to crush everything down anymore. And it's sort of like your body just sort of kind of like your brain's just broken. Your body's fine, but your kind of brain's just broken, and you can't operate in the world. So, like you said, I couldn't walk or talk or anything. Nothing could process. And in my mind, which was quite weird, it just felt like a child again. So those kind of feelings of extreme panic and things that I'd had as a child. And I thought it made me feel quite differently about quite a few things. One of the things I had been writing about in the PhD was about memory and false memory, and the idea that, each time you remember something, you're creating a new story. You're sort of telling yourself a new story about yourself or your past or whatever. And also I sort of mentioned the conflict just then, is that I've got lots of sisters and they all cope with our childhood experiences very differently. And which also, sorry, kind of rambling, relates to the idea we're talking about multiple voices. And in that book I've written, I've tried to sort of express multiple voices. And you're talking about, the multiple voices, and then hopefully no one's particularly higher than the other. And I've tried to sort of use a naive narrator so that maybe the reader can kind of guess some or imagine some things for themselves as well, and which perhaps has a parallel with your annotation idea. So yeah, that made me think about memory. Was that, I mean, it's not something I particularly kind of adhered to before, but I know that like a craniosacral, and that idea is that you have memories aren't just in your brain, or that they're sort of physically in you. And I suppose that relates to the objects as well. So when I went to see my father's garden. I went to see, I hadn't seen him for, I don't know, probably, you know, over 20 years. And then I saw him in the garden, and I just kind of couldn't help myself. I went and knocked on his door. It was about 5 in the morning. Answered in a nice pair of pants and a massive sort of slash down the bum crack. That's nice. And it was sort of the objects that he had that I remembered from childhood, and like being in photos. Like there's this Moroccan leather poof that we used to like poofing on, and it would come like out with sort of Moroccan newspaper bits of newspaper shreds and things. That made me think, yeah, I really did have that life. I didn't imagine this weird, horrific life. And unfortunately, I don't know, it's my brain or my body or where it's kept, but every night, you know, I return to it. And really during the day, I kind of feel like I'm sleepwalking this new, much nicer life where I've got, you know, a nice partner and I live in a house and have a baby boy, and I'm safe, you know, and hopefully, you know, I can tell people to leave me alone and they can't abuse me in any way. But mostly I feel, and certainly if I didn't take antidepressants, I would definitely feel you know, I can't move on from childhood, I'm afraid. I'm just terrible. So I do see these beautiful things and objects, but in some ways I kind of feel, I don't know, this is like terrible analysis, isn't it? But I feel like I'm quite like a dark, murky, sort of sludgy presence, and have this kind of thing, a bit like the River Mersey. Near where I grew up, which is the most horrible river for me. Sorry if any people love the Mersey there, but I just feel I might like that. Like every morning I'm sifting through. So yeah, that's partly why I started doing the illustration after the stroke, was to try and think of things that are kind of light and happy, I guess, and were kind of less serious in a way. I don't know. Does any of that make sense, Nadia?
Yeah, it's really amazing. It's like an also a sort of amazing self-awareness of like that journey of like experience in the body, and then the way that making like physical, you know, visual expression through making stuff like can do something really important. And for you, like personally, like I feel like, you know, like making work is so much about trying to, for me, it's so much about trying to figure stuff out, like and it, like I couldn't live without it. Like I don't know what would happen if I didn't have space.
It would happen.
I don't know, maybe I'd be maybe I'd be really happy. I mean, I'm not really unhappy, but
no.
But I don't know, the idea of not being able to make work is terrifying. It's terrifying. So yeah, so again, to go back to this idea of like success and how, in a sense, I feel like a notion of success is really redundant in the figuring out of my own practice and making, it just doesn't figure as something, as a driver or something to make work. It is about this, just the pure like amazing enjoyment of like thought and having a space to think. I mean, occasionally for those things to almost manifest as an object or a thing or a painting or I don't know, but I don't know, God, you're like, yeah, and can you say a bit about when the book is coming out?
Yeah,
like,
so it's coming out March, April, May. It's coming out in May next year, so that will be exciting. Maybe it'll be like but yeah, anyway.
Is it like have you sort of, does it start in the PhD or is it completely separate? And then
it did start in the PhD, and it was the idea when we were talking about how to collect things or how to sort of analyze things, and in a non-hierarchical way. It was sort of that idea, like you were saying about the multitudinous voices. I guess, and I wanted to do it more like that, then I wanted that to sort of be the research, because there was no history of Anna Atkins. And then I found she'd written these really amazing books, like novels and novellas and things, that seemed to have really incredibly sort of obvious quotes about, you know, that she was there was a description of a willow tree supporting this oak tree, and the oak, the you know, as a like a kind of little a stick of willow that was just meant to literally physically hold up the oak as a sapling. And the oak was meant to grow really big and the willow's meant to die. But in this one case, the willow went, fuck you, and it grew and the oak died. So it's basically, it seemed always she was writing about these sort of, you know, her in a supportive role. And then she did these fake, I'm sure I told you, she faked the specimens and then donated them to these institutions that wouldn't have let her be a member because she was female. And then it was only through looking that I went, oh my God, she's cut, you know, women weren't even allowed to be a surgeon then. So they were thinking she was this naive idiot going, here, have my lovely flower prints. And she was going, right, and I'm going to make this like that. I'm going to cut it like that. Oh, I've made a new plant. And I'm going to put it in these institutions, go, look, these are like perfect things. And they're all her fabrications. So it's kind of like you were talking about the, you know, confabulation and sort of made up story. So she just kind of created her own weird botany and donated it to these scientific places, which seems quite sort of subversive, really, I think.
Really silently into this work, like really stridently. And then just the more I looked at it, the more it was about those things for me. And then the more I read about her, and then eventually went to Chicago and then interviewed her, like a lot of her circle, and, you know, got autobiographical details that were really interesting. So it just, I was
going to say, you write things, and that's part of what you do as well, isn't it?
Yeah. I feel like in I don't know, like thinking about your work, maybe you were saying the illustration, like the illustration you do for yourself, and then the commission stuff is something else, which is dependent on other people's needs and wants. But you know, I feel like the thing that links all those things together in your work is obviously it's you and your kind of interests. And then I just was thinking about like the, and I don't know, I might misunderstand this, but I feel like you do those things because you enjoy all of them, or they allow you to think in different ways and move between.
Yeah. Is that how you feel about the writing?
I think so much of the work is about the things I can't get into the painting. So, you know, all the things I lose faith in paintings being able to communicate. And I think that's to do, I think that I did used to think that painting could do that. But I think the way that I have taught myself to paint, which comes from a sort of academic tradition, comes with a whole set of baggage that other people looking at it can't see beyond it. They only see the certain kind of like careful realization or whatever. And so I think the like the writing and the like large wall prints, and like, you know, text being read or something, like those things are all there because they're part of the work, but maybe they're there because I don't have faith in people being able to discern them in a painting on its own. Like, you know,
but do they work with one another as well? Do you think the big, yeah,
definitely. I mean,
you have a show, isn't it? You have the paintings and the huge photographic prints. So, and can I ask you, because your work, I don't know how you feel about this, but I wonder if people, because you're very skilled at drawing and you're really good at accurately representing something, were people sad when you stopped doing that? Because your work used to be different, didn't it? No, they weren't.
Well, no, I don't think I have an audience, so I don't you know, I don't have, there would be no one to be sad, basically.
I know that people do marvel as a part of me, even that, you know, because they're really beautiful. But I absolutely love your new work. It's very, but it seems very different, but maybe it isn't. Do you think it is? It's not new anyway now. You've been doing it probably for, don't know, how long do you think you're doing?
Maybe like
10 years, isn't it?
Like, 10, 11
Yeah.
years. Sorry, yeah, I'm just what you were saying, like,
Well,
do I
just,
do I
did you
similar
come to a point where you think, actually, I could do this quite differently? This isn't like you were just saying, that it didn't communicate everything that you wanted to communicate. And also using women of the part, or not even of, but different women and artists as a kind of, not as a cipher, but somebody to communicate with, to make work with. Do you think that when did that happen? Do you think that was about roughly a similar era? Did you just feel frustrated in the past about,
yeah, no, I just had I mean, if I do a talk, I ramble through the whole narrative, which I've...
Oh, that's interesting. I'd like to know that really briefly, but maybe you can't do that.
Well, no, I just basically had a huge artist block, and I couldn't make work anymore, and I couldn't use the language that I taught myself to use. I can make a painting. I still find it really hard to finish any paintings. And yeah, and I went to the British School at Rome, and then I did the Durham Cathedral residency. Whilst at the British School at Rome, I was finding it almost impossible to make anything. And I knew that there was something, and I knew there's something really wrong, and that I really needed to change it, but I just didn't know how to do it. And then I was looking at Winifred Knights there, who was the first woman Rome scholar. And like at that point, I hadn't read any of her correspondence, but was aware that she had this like really unsupportable process of making paintings, that eventually she couldn't make any paintings because she had to draw every single element in the paintings, and the paintings were actually quite large scale, and that she just couldn't make them cohere as paintings. So there's like only 7 paintings, and there's like some that are just unfinished, and it's just like an unsupportable practice. And I just became, I just was like, Christ, there's someone else. Like, how do you do this in the long game, and how do you do it if you love painting and you can't paint anymore? And so it just started with this thing of like trying to just find someone to think alongside, or read about what they thought previously, or to have a companion, or like the thing I kind of like, the way I romanticize it, I guess now, is like to have this imagined mentor.
Yeah, oh, that's so good. That's such a nice idea. Was that your phone?
No, not my phone.
And that's such a nice idea, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think it's like, and it's really difficult, isn't it? I mean, I think it's really difficult for everyone at art school, and to find your like artistic family, whatever that may be. But I think it's really, really difficult, like pre-internet, in the, when we were studying, like you've got the library. Well, the library tells one story of art history.
Yeah,
and then,
yeah.
I think I was really into outsider art because that was the only way of finding some kind of contemporary alternative. And then now, of course, like with the access of so much different kind of work from all over the world online, you suddenly can make your own art family and your own histories, and you can find your mentors, can't you, who can be there.
Idea. That's such a nice idea. I think I need to do that. I think I have been just, what I was talking about, just living in that house. I haven't really known what to do, but you've inspired me. I'm gonna try and do that.
It sounds like you've been doing it anyway.
How? I really don't know what I'm doing.
No. Isn't it that, like, I don't really paint anymore, and maybe you don't. I mean, I always think of you as someone that uses paint, who then might be a painter.
You do paint as well, don't you?
I do, but not really that much. So I don't know. I just think that the creativity is finding other forms, and
whichever way works.
And that, like, it's taken maybe a long time well, it's definitely taken me a really long time, but maybe it hasn't taken you a long time. But you know, it's just trying to find that the suitable way to make creative expression, isn't it? That you can make work and you can do it, and I just think that some of those sort of categories and ways of describing can be real kind of hindrances. And
Yeah.
like,
Yes.
at the beginning, like, you know, the sort of myth of the artist studio, or the idea of the genius, or the like some of these like untenable and like totally unsupportable ways of being a practitioner now, particularly in light of COVID.
Yeah.
You know, they're just like myths that aren't that helpful when you're a really young woman or a
Yeah.
young.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Yeah, what am I saying?
Oh yeah, I agree completely. I think
I
that's
wanted something. I just, when we were talking
yeah.
about meditation, and then this thing of like um, artist mentors, and when I was like reading the Winifred Knight's correspondence,
Oh yeah.
I went back and read that correspondence, and then in that I realized that she wasn't at peace with her own like inability to make work. She had a stillborn child, which really fucked her up in her late 20s, and from that point onwards I think she really struggled to make work. And then eventually, about 10 years later, she had another child, and then sadly she died when she was 47 of a brain hemorrhage, when her son was only 8 or something. So she didn't have a kind of, she's a tough mentor, because she had the template of her creative life is really kind of difficult. But in the kind of like early glory days of when she's this fresh-faced young thing at the British school in Rome, and she's experimenting with clothing as a way of like having agency in a kind of Roman art world. She was really into basically dancing and dressing up, and she allowed that to like permeate her work. So she would make basically some of the figures in her paintings as either self-portraits, or they're wearing the sort of clothing that she wore, which is a very strange clothing to be wearing in like 1950, like 1920 or whatever. And then she wears that until she dies in like 46, 47. But that there'd been like a previous researcher who had read the correspondence for a book in the 90s maybe, and they'd done this really weird thing of annotating the correspondence on the correspondence. And there was this big thing that you know, around the side, and it just said, "There's nothing here except dancing and dressing up." Like on this like damningly, like on this really amazing heartfelt correspondence that's
Bastard.
and I just thought, that's exactly the point. Like, she's dancing and dressing up. Like, you hit on it. And if you don't understand that about her, then you don't understand a single thing about her work or her life, or the value of that work now for like someone looking back at it in time, for a young woman looking back at it in time, or like, I don't know, just, yeah, like, you know, annotation can like give another kind of woman's voice to something.
That's really
But it can also be like so revealing in terms of like stupid opinions, or like my own.
really interesting, and it shows that's, you know, she might have wanted to do that from the start, but then that's the sort of atmosphere in which she had to fight against. It shows how kind of brave she was to do dancing and dressing up. It's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, she probably wouldn't have seen it as like practice. I mean, I've always been really careful to say that she obviously probably didn't see her clothes making as practice, but then there was kind of like interior design and things. But you cannot ignore that it's all part of the edifice, like all part of the body of work, and we have to like think of it in that way. But then it also just like moving annotation onto thinking about your Instagram account, Billet Du.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah.
Amazing, because that's really revealing about other people and books.
Isn't it interesting? When it started, do you remember I used to work in that secondhand bookshop with Keith, and he quite often used to have things, and then he like pieces of paper, like amazing love letters, and then he just used them to write his shopping list on. I thought, Keith, don't do that. It's awful. Like there was one, it said the title thing was from the sketch, and someone said, I came to the bar but you weren't here, I won't see you for another 5 years. And then Keith had just like written his shopping list on the back. I was like, you bastard, that seems such a romantic story. Yeah, so it's just all the stuff. And then in Woodbridge, as you know, where we both used to live at one stage, or maybe you less than me, kind of, I'm not sure. But anyway, we know it well anyway. It's a weird combination, is it, of lots of very kind of posh rich people, and also a few very few not so posh rich people. But the things I used to find in the books were amazing, like there's ones of the Queen and stuff, like when she was little, playing, like photos. And yeah, so yeah, it's just all the stuff that's chucked away is quite interesting. Sometimes said in the mainstream. I remember she's called Annabella Pollen, and she did a lovely PhD. She started at the same time as me. Now she writes books on sort of clothing and you know what it says. But she looked at this project, which was, I think, maybe done by the News of the World or a kind of tabloid press, where you put in a photo that was meant to sum up a day of the year, and I don't know what era it was, maybe 80s. Sorry, don't know. But she looked at all the rejects and said they were so much more interesting than the ones that made it to the book. Really weird ones, like people giving birth, really kind of semi-pedo, weird, dodgy ones that obviously seen as possibly okay at the time, I don't know. But yes, it's often the rejected, isn't it, and the sort of outtakes and the things on the margin that's sometimes quite fascinating, and not necessarily the big things that make it to the...
Yeah, I mean, they're just more revealing. But
yeah,
I think it's like just thinking about your work and just thinking also maybe like, again, like to draw commonalities. It's just this like interest in other people's like circumstances and conditions and life experiences and like the poignancy of some of these things. Just like really incredibly, so endlessly. I mean, I find it endlessly fascinating. I'm sure everybody finds it endlessly. I mean, maybe they don't, but I feel that that's like a similarity. So we make work in really different ways.
I think when people die, I always think, God, what is it that seems so odd that they've died? Or things like that they had a really good sense of humor, or that they were really incredibly hot and sexy, or those things that you think you can't really ally with somebody that's dead. It's just, I don't know how you keep those things alive. But as you say, for me as well, definitely nothing. I love painting, but it wasn't. Yeah, I think writing at the moment for me feels more of an easier way to talk about those kind of things. I don't know really.
Yeah. That's so amazing what you were just saying about that idea of how incompatible. You're basically saying how incompatible those like essential things of life are with death.
I just find it endlessly I just don't understand it. I mean, you experienced it, you know, when you were quite young with the death of someone, and I don't know, do you think that had an impact on your life?
Yeah, I think definitely. Yeah, totally. I mean, I think more recently, a really close family friend died during COVID, not of COVID, but the circumstance was that they, you know, as a result of COVID, couldn't get a diagnosis and then very rapidly declined. And so it speeded everything up. And then we had to, because we couldn't, I'm here in Sweden, I couldn't go and see them. And so I had to sort of send text messages. And what I really wanted to communicate was the sort of personal things that had meant so much, that had really enriched, made me value life.
Yeah.
They'd, you know, done. And one thing they used to do was that they would make, really, for us as children, really amazing shite desserts with loads of great cream and like hundreds of thousands. And I just said, I just really loved, I'd like thought twice about sending it because it sounded so sort of slight, but it was like, you know, I just loved those desserts you used to make. I couldn't wait to come round to your
really imaginative and nice, isn't it? Yeah.
You're just going to be remembered for your desserts, but the joy you gave us all.
Exactly. That was really fun and really thoughtful that they've done that.
Really. So, I don't know. Yeah, maybe like, I don't know. I think I'm quite sentimental, and and that the work can be maybe sentimental, but I think that's a result of loss, isn't it? Or maybe it's not sentimental, but it's just
value emotions.
Attuning to like the emotional is like really important.
Definitely. That's without that I think you're fucked, aren't you? If you don't tune to
Not
the emotional.
empathetic